And you've met most of our presenters. To my left here is Dr. Joyce Che. And we haven't formally introduced you, and I didn't bring your formal introduction up, but she is a physician with an interest in the subject matter. Oh, we're good. Let's have it. Dr. Vine has it.
It's a delight this afternoon to welcome Dr. Joyce Che. She's an MD and an MPH, Masters in Public Health. Dr. Che is a board-certified ophthalmologist who has been in medical practice for almost 20 years. She has a deep interest in the Adventist health message and is a co-founder of medmissionary.com, a ministry that was founded to help educate, encourage, and train Adventists for true medical missionary work. Dr. Che can be reached at medmissionary.com and wholenessmarket.com, and you also are the administrator of a wonderful closed Facebook group on medical missionary work, and I'm blessed by your ministry and we're delighted to welcome you here this afternoon. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Che.
Thank you for joining us. Okay, I think everyone else here has been introduced in a different segment, and so we won't take any more time for that. So we're going to ask God to guide in our dialogue, so I invite you to bow your head, and I'm going to ask John Kelly if you'll grab one of those microphones there and have a prayer for us to start this off.
Father in heaven, thank you for the privilege of choice. Thank you that you created us, and I believe your entire intelligent universe, with freedom of choice and autonomy. And with that comes great responsibility. So we pray that your Holy Spirit will be present to guide, direct, to teach and instruct, and help those of us who are going to seek to answer these questions. Give us more than human wisdom. We pray in Christ's name. Amen.
All right, we have a variety of questions this afternoon. Some will be medical, some will deal with spiritual, conscience, and coercion issues. Some will deal with issues of legality. Our panel represents all of those, and it'll be a dialogue, and at times we'll be looking to different ones for the launching of the conversation. So let's start out with a difficult one, all right? I'm going to direct this to Dr. McCullough, and the question that was sent in is, are the unvaccinated the primary drivers for the Delta wave?
So the current wave of the viral pandemic that we're in is called Delta, and we anticipate here in Michigan and elsewhere where nearly 100% of cases are the Delta variant. It's the most mutated variant. Prior to vaccination, Delta was here, as well as many other strains. So prior to vaccination, we had about a dozen different strains circulating. And when individuals got COVID, it could be one of maybe 12 different. In fact, somebody could actually get 2 different strains of COVID. Once we got to 25% vaccination, and there's a very good paper from the Mayo Clinic that's shown this, when we get to 25% of vaccination, that encourages one strain to move forward and become the dominant strain. And that's what happened to Delta. So having a Delta outbreak now of 100% of one strain, which you've never had before, that's a product of mass vaccination. It's a consequence of mass vaccination. So the question is it a good thing or a bad thing? The paper from the Mayo Clinic suggests it's a good thing, since Delta is in general has a lower mortality than the previous wild type or British or South African variants. But the Delta outbreak is a product of vaccination. And now the disturbing thing is that a paper by Lau from China and now one from Chow in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, has shown that the vaccinated people can carry a huge concentration of the Delta variant, 250 times in their nose and mouth. And so when they spread it to somebody who's unvaccinated, it's a super potent inoculum. And so that, to me, that's the most disturbing thing that we've seen. So it is true the unvaccinated are a higher proportion of Americans in the hospital, but it's very likely they've actually gotten it because someone who's vaccinated has passed it to them.
Okay, very serious. Anyone else can jump in. I'm going to go to another one, somewhat related to what you just said. I believe it'll be directed to you firstly. What is shedding? How does it work? And can it impact the unvaccinated? Which you just answered, but if you want to...
Briefly, the vaccines all have tricked the body into producing the spike protein, which is not normal in the human body. The spike protein is the spine on the ball of the virus. That was the product of the bioterrorism gain-of-function research done in the Chinese lab. So when one takes the vaccine, they are having their body produce spike protein. The Chinese have shown us through research that the virus, and we assume the spike protein as well, since it's just a part of the virus, gets into all the secretions. It gets into nasal secretions and sweat, urogenital secretions, breast milk. And so shedding is the idea that some spike protein, which itself causes disease or causes symptoms, can actually be spread to someone else. So there are examples of this that's been on the national news. One of the most obvious examples is a woman who's breastfeeding. She takes the vaccine, and then a few days later, the baby dies. And it's either the baby got exposed to the vaccine material itself, the lipid nanoparticles, the messenger RNA, or more likely the spike protein, which we know spike protein in a dose can be lethal. What I have seen so far is a vaccinated person in close contact with an unvaccinated person, like kissing and sexual contact, and then having that unvaccinated person like develop shingles in a young person, somebody in their 30s, you wouldn't expect shingles. I've seen that, and then recently I was made aware of boys that were, 4 boys were going off to college. They just got in the dorm room. One of them got vaccinated, and then with his contact around the other boys, two of the boys themselves contracted the natural virus, but it was in the context of the vaccinated boys that one of them just developed blood clots in all his throughout his body, like really serious blood clots. He had to be hospitalized and pulmonary emboli. And it's unusual to see a 22-year-old have such an expression. It's the idea the spike protein causes blood clotting. And so the questions were, was this shedding that really primed this boy? And then once he got COVID, it really took off. So we're concerned about shedding. People have said, well, what are the recommendations without any other information? I'm saying if someone takes the vaccine, probably a month of no close contact, no kissing, sexual contact, stuff like that.
So I'm going to ask a question not on the sheet. Last week, in the message I was presenting, I referenced to an interview between Mobeen Syed, Dr. Bean, and Paul Merrick of the FCCC. In that hour and 30 long minute interview, which I thought was quite balanced and very good, Dr. Bean said that, and I'm asking you this partially because of your cardiology expertise, he talked about, from the CDC, I think the number was 59% of certain cardiac events associated with the liabilities of this disease were seen between 12 and 24-year-old kids. Have you heard that? Is that anything you're familiar with? But there was a disproportionate number of heart events in the younger age, and those statistics he had taken from the CDC.
Cardiac?
Yeah.
So that's true, and the FDA agrees with that. The FDA has formal warnings on Pfizer and Moderna, and the FDA just upgraded that for Moderna. So it's true, younger individuals, men more than women, but it can happen to women. The idea here is the vaccine is taken up into the heart. The heart produces the spike protein, which is very abnormal for the heart, and then the spike protein damages the heart.
Okay, I'm going to pivot to Dr. Lewis here as an OBGYN physician. Would you recommend the vaccine to children under 18 or to women of reproductive age?
In answer to that question, no, I would not. And there's a lot of research, I would say, that Dr. McCullough presented last night to indicate that. Particularly in the individuals less than 20 years of age, we saw, again, they just updated it, Moderna having a significant increased risk of myocarditis, but also Pfizer, particularly in the young boys. But as far as the women are concerned, I'm an obstetrician and gynecologist. I would not recommend this to my pregnant patients. Again, this is not what is recommended by the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, which is, of course, the governing body over my specialty. They are recommending it. However, if you listen to what Dr. McCullough presented yesterday, there is a significant increased association with it being concentrated in the ovaries. We don't know what that's going to look like long term as far as fertility is concerned. How is this affecting the follicles? What is it doing genetically? And as far as the fetuses or the babies are concerned, there is concern the antibody relationship to the placenta. So in answer to your question, no.
I'm going to follow up then with another one. I know in the papers I've printed off, this one came from National Public Radio, so that's a point of reference for those that want that when we're evaluating sources. Even in the last few weeks, I've noticed a willingness of a different spectrum of the media to acknowledge some of the problems with the vaccine. And there on the NPR website was a post, I think it was a blog, about a female doctor, and it must have been pretty undeniable to make it onto this site, heavy menstrual cycles and concerns there. So it is on the, here's the question, are the vaccines impacting women's menstrual cycles, fertility, and leading to miscarriages? Anybody can jump in? Okay, the short answer is yes. Does anybody?
Yeah, I would say as far as what I'm seeing in clinical practice, I am seeing an increased rate, and I can't for sure definitively state that it is directly related to the vaccine, but we are seeing an increased rate in preterm delivery. We are seeing that in labor and delivery. Dr. McCullough, I think, can tell us a little bit more as far as the research he indicated last night, but we are seeing an increased rate in early to late preterm deliveries.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to direct this next question to Joyce and John. Talk with us, if you would. We'll let ladies go first. Joyce, about boosting our immune system, adjusting our lifestyles to mitigate COVID and variants.
So this is something that I think a lot of people, they come to lifestyle medicine with the same approach that they do with conventional medicine. Conventional medicine, when you get sick, you want to correct that symptom you're having. So if you have a fever, you want to take a pill to bring it down. You want that simple fix. And it doesn't work this way. With COVID, the people who tend to get sick and end up in the ICU are the weakest. They have chronic inflammatory conditions going on. And so what we need to do is we need to decrease those inflammatory sources. And one of the most important sources of inflammation is going to be what you put in your body every day, and that's your food. And so I would recommend that if you are wanting to avoid COVID, get on the most anti-inflammatory, plant-based diet. And this is not your typical Vegalinks type of thing. We have a lot of Adventists who are like, I'm already on a vegan plant-based diet, and they think that that counts. That is going to count against you. Okay, so we actually have a cookbook at Wholeness Market. We help people with healing the gut, and I think Dr. McCullough had talked about how these vaccines will actually change the environment in the gut. We have to do something about this. Agriculture is doing something. All these antibiotics, all the processed foods that we're eating are constantly changing this. And so we're very, very proactive about this. So I'd say the diet is the first thing. And then we have a whole bunch of natural remedies, oregano oil inhalations, garlic. Some of these very simple things have been super powerful. I think we helped hundreds of people when COVID first started, just over the phone. And we haven't heard of anybody, dying or anything like that. The people that stayed sickest the longest were the people who were just resistant to doing anything. They tended to be the men. So.
Do you have a website where we can access this kind of information?
Yes, on MedMissionary, medmissionary.com, we have a training school, so every 2 months we start again. We just started doing this in April, and by September we'll have about 200 people that have gone through our training program. And so we help people with coaching them through COVID, coaching them through this dietary change. Also, Mercy at Years Restored, she does coaching, and I'm trying to think where we have all of this all put together, but we'll do that now that you're asking me.
Okay.
Kelly?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Need to press the button. It's on. Thank you, Dr. Cho. I appreciate that. Even the comment about us men. But I want to say two things. I agree with what she said. Sometimes you can do more, however, than just diet and those kinds of things. You can use hydrotherapy. You can use natural remedies. We have some solid evidence from studies, many of them back with the Spanish flu, that show that things like contrast shower with the hot and cold can help boost the innate immune system. Now we learned more recently the part of the immune system strengthened by hydrothermal therapy is the innate immune system primarily. And what's interesting is even if you have the vaccine and you have antibodies, cell-specific immunity, that doesn't kick in for a week or so. And so you need to have stronger innate immunity to help. And this question about shedding, there's some evidence that shows that if you have strong natural killer cells, other monocytes, you will have less shedding than someone with a weaker innate immune system. So anyway, I just want to throw in a little plug there for the natural remedies. They can be very effective.
And I want to just add to that, when you get sick, you have to jump on these natural remedies. You cannot wait. So first thing, change the diet, but you have to do what Dr. Kelly was saying. Jump in the shower. We do the oregano oil inhalations because they're so quick and easy. Getting the garlic in, all this kind of stuff. But you just have to jump on it and do tons of it. And then people call us and they're like, I think it was just a cold. And you'll find it's not so bad usually.
I wanted to add to this. As more of a conventional doctor, I prescribe medicines for a living. But I have to tell you, I had COVID-19 myself in October, and my wife and I came down at the same time. And I was treating patients with COVID through the entire year, so I know sooner or later I was taking a risk that I would get exposed and get it. I don't think I got it from a patient. I honestly think my wife got it from the grocery store. She must have, gotten exposed to someone. So here we are. We both have COVID at the same time. And we got involved in a research program. And it's actually wonderful to be involved in research because when we don't know what's going on, there's a way of studying this. So we studied our pulse oximeters, and we were in this protocol and measuring our heart rates and what have you. And one of the things we did as part of the study is we studied the microbiome. And my wife had a much easier course with this than I did. And I ended up having it in my lungs, and I had to go through a sequence of medicines. And as it turned out, we had the British variant, by the way. So we had the alpha variant because it was sequenced out of our stool in the research. But what was shown is my wife's microbiome was way better than mine. And there's now a consistent observation that the microbiome, which is the constellation of bacteria in the GI tract, largely determined by healthy habits and particularly plant-based diets, of which I'm not on. But the idea that the microbiome, and Dr. Hazen in California has shown this, that if we take any family, like say 6 people in a household, there's always 1 or 2 who don't get COVID. It's never 100%. And the people who are naturally resistant to COVID have the highest health scores on the microbiome. It's really fascinating. So the microbiome, and she even has a case example where there's a husband and wife, and they were kissing and all this stuff, and he had this terrific microbiome, and no matter what, he could not get it, COVID-19, from his wife, and she was able to prove it. The one other thing I'd say is that knowing that I was taking risks last year, I intentionally lost weight and got even better shape, and I really worked at getting shape, and I was really glad I did because I was resilient. And there is a concept that's used in medicine called survival of the fittest, and actually the person who coined it was for medical care was Barry Franklin here at Beaumont Hospital. And what Barry said is that the reason why we exercise is not to prevent disease. The reason why we exercise is to survive acute illness. So if we have a traumatic injury, the person who's the fittest is most likely to survive. Someone who gets cancer, the most fittest survive. The person who develops heart failure, we even had a paper we published, someone who's previously fit who suffers a heart attack is much more likely to survive the heart attack. And the same thing is true with COVID. Sadly, I just lost a patient 2 days ago to COVID. He was 39 years old. He's the son of a prominent pastor in a church in Fort Worth. And both him and his wife developed COVID, and I was kind of orchestrating the sequence treatment behind. He was a big guy, obese, big meat eater, non-exerciser. The wife was thinner. The wife, we sequenced all the drugs. We actually got the monoclonal antibodies. She got really sick. They have 4 children. She survives. He gets late on early treatment, never gets to that antibody because he literally crashed. And I went over it with the father today. He wanted to go over the sequence again. The son got 3 days of early outpatient treatment, not enough. And then he goes in the hospital. He's in the hospital another week, and then he just crashed and died a few days ago. So I want to put this out here. Even though we say Delta is milder, it is. It's more easily treatable early. Once we get in the hospital, it's the same lethal disease, and the hospital is a nightmare. And fortunately, we reviewed it, and the pastor was asking me, did he receive every high standard of care? We went through everything. I said, thankfully, I can tell you, he received everything that I could think of that would have saved his life. When someone dies, it's very important. If you're ever consoling someone who dies, particularly physicians, and I teach this to students and residents, there's 2 important things that the family needs to know. This is absolutely critical. They need to know that he did not suffer in the end. This is really important. And I hit those with the pastor today, and I did it Thursday night. He did not suffer. Very important. That has to be in the family mind, no matter what has actually happened. They did not suffer. The second thing is everything was done. If those 2 are left unaddressed, there can be decades of anguish in the family members' minds. Very, very important.
Yes, I just want to say one thing about what Dr. Cho was talking about diet. For an Adventist audience, because most of Adventists are promoting or have adopted a plant diet, I want to say that beer and pretzels is vegan. So my point being, most of us Adventists, even if we're plant diet, we're eating too processed of food. Our diet is not optimal. If you want to agree or second what I'm saying, but it just occurred to me while I was thinking about this, that in this particular audience, I think it's important to help you realize we're talking about needing to eat more simply. Yes, you can be a vegetarian, and that's good. But for optimal benefit and for the optimal biome, you want to eat simpler than we are used to eating.
And Dr. Layla was sharing on the car yesterday how you treated yourself with the hydrotherapy. Could you share with us tonight, this afternoon?
Yes, I will. I'm going to reveal something to you. First of all, I'm not contagious anymore, so Dr. McCullough, can you confirm that for me?
I can.
Okay.
She's short of breath. She's short of breath. And
Let me tell you something. Last Sabbath, I was in the emergency department. I had Delta. I was very, very ill. And I got it from an event that I had gone to a week before. Dr. McCullough came to my aid with very, very early treatment. My test results initially were negative. Right off the bat went in. I had an antigen test, it was negative. Was started on early treatment. Thank you again, Dr. McCullough and another doctor friend of mine. I was not responding. I immediately started with hydrotherapy. How many of you guys know how to do hydrothermal therapy? Just raise your hand. How many of you know how to do fomentations?
Wow.
All right. Well, try doing fomentations when you're sick and you have 102 temperature. It's a little bit difficult to do on yourself. I'm going to describe it very, very briefly, but I think that for our viewing audience and for those of you who haven't done it, it is phenomenal. So it's particularly important when you start to notice that the virus is settling in your chest. So I used a thermophore. A thermophore is kind of like a heating pad, if you will, but Battle Creek, actually. Battle Creek company, I have no stock in the company, by the way. You can control the temperature with the device. So I used a charcoal poultice to begin with. I had my daughter help me put it on the back, put a thermophore on the back underneath, put the charcoal on the front, and put another thermophore on the front, and left the heat on for 15 minutes, covered my body in a large blanket, put my feet in a foot bath, a hot foot bath. Don't burn yourself, be careful about that, and laid there and sweat. And then as soon as the 15 minutes was over, do a nice, very cold ice friction rub. So my daughter rubbed my back with ice on the back, and I rubbed my chest. I went all the way from my, just under my chin, all the way to my groin. And I did this 3 times during the night. This was after going to the emergency department, which, by the way, for our physicians in the audience, my white count was 1.9. Did you guys hear that? 1.9. That's essentially non-existent. I had no immune system. And the Lord blessed tremendously. I am here. Yes, Dr. McCullough is noticing that I still have a little bit of shortness of breath. Not bad. Praise God. I am sitting here and I am well. I do believe in the microbiome 100%. Taking all of the pre, and postbiotics cannot encourage you enough, and cannot encourage you in the importance that God gave us a diet in Genesis. Genesis 1:29, He gave us a diet. Go back to our diet, go back to what God has told us, and I promise He will bless. And I'm here as a living testimony of that.
We're gonna jump to Joyce, and then we can go back to Peter. But I've got up on my phone right here a study from Forks Over Knives, sent to me by one of our medical people. Plant-based diets linked to lower risk of severe COVID-19 in new study. So very good. Joyce?
Praise the Lord. So I think that a lot of people, when they want to improve their microbiome, they want to do a lot of fancy things like kombucha and kimchi and this type of thing. And I just want to let you know that your microbiome is constantly changing. You know, they did a study that found that when you live in a household with somebody who's taking an antibiotic, that changes your microbiome too. So it just goes to show this thing with shedding and what the vaccine might do, what the virus might do, we all impact each other. Amen? So in a good way and in a bad way, and we can't be afraid of that. You know, people who are unvaccinated are afraid of the shedding of other people. I did live in a household with someone who was vaccinated for a while, and it did affect me some. But I live a very anti-inflammatory life, and I would rather live with that person in my life than be fearful. Amen? And I've told my neighbors too, if you get sick, you know, first I'll try over the phone because I don't want to have to quarantine necessarily. But if you need help, I'll help you. You know, and I think that is what doing this lifestyle, what the most powerful aspect of it is that you are not fearful to live. And you're not fearful to do what you're supposed to do. You know, Dr. Rubel, during the 1918 pandemic, he said, you know, this pandemic, we Adventists knew that it was going to come because the Bible says that as Jesus' coming draws near, we're going to have more of these. How are we preparing for it? Are you preparing to help your brother and sister, or are we going to be living in fear? And so I just think that all of these things that we do, if we could live the most anti-inflammatory way, it is a blessing to be able to still be able to help other people and not live in fear.
Just on a practical thing, so you may wonder, does Dr. Lewis need a test? So she's sitting around, does she need a test? Is she still contagious? Somebody who's untreated, who's sick with fever and feels body aches, whatever, who feels sick, they can be contagious for about 14 days. Early treatment with the drugs that we're talking about, even leading off with monoclonal antibodies and hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, the other drugs, that can shorten the contagious period to about 4 days. So in this research study I was in, my wife and I were actually swabbing ourselves every day. And that was part of research. And it's not practical, but it was wonderful to be a part of research. These got sent in, and we learned quickly that both of us actually had cleared the virus. We no longer had the virus in our throats measurable within 4 days. Both of us cleared the virus within 4 days. And you know, I have an office at a big medical center. So once I was on around day 6 or so, I felt better, and I called the employee health. I said, well, what do I need to do? Do I need a test or what have you? And there was some kind of old warhorse nurse who picked up the phone, and she said, are you kidding? We did that at first. These tests are positive for months afterwards. No way. She goes, as long as you don't have a fever and your cough is controllable, come on back. And so that is such a piece of practical advice. Do you know these tests are not approved for asymptomatic people? They're not approved for post-recovery. You don't need a test. And myself and Dr. Gilbert, we don't need to prove our immunity. Once we have a solid case of COVID-19, there is complete, endurable, and robust immunity as far as we can see. This is similar to SARS-1, where the immunity now has been perfect for 17 years. There's never been someone who got a second case. The only confusion that could happen is if either one of us, by chance, a few months from now, got a test for some reason and it was false positive. And people say, aha, you got a second infection. No, I didn't. I had a false positive test. There's never been a bona fide case where someone is sick here and then, 6 months later sick there. And we know this because the nursing homes are not having all these repeat cases coming in. And I mentioned yesterday with the vaccine, we've had tens of thousands of vaccine failures in the United States. We haven't had a single documented failure of natural immunity. So all of you who have had COVID-19, you can live your life without fear. Honestly, if you came face to face with someone, you're not going to get the virus. That's actually true herd immunity.
And one more really quick thing. For those of us who are COVID recovered, what a blessing. What a blessing, because I feel like now, like you're saying, without fear, I can take care of my COVID. I mean, I was already taking care of COVID patients, but now I feel even more empowered that I can take care of my COVID patients and maybe even in their homes as well.
I got sidetracked and I forgot to tell you where to improve your microbiome. So, one thing is from your food. So you want to eat a lot of non-processed, raw, eat your fruits at one meal, eat your veggies at another meal. That's going to be very helpful for your digestive system. We have a way of eating where you soak and sprout. When you do this, it will increase nutrient availability 30 to 50%. Isn't that amazing? And then you are going to decrease the inflammatory lectins that will bind to the digestive tract and cause inflammation. So it's a win-win situation when you soak and sprout everything. And then also getting outside into nature. When you interact with the soil, that's going to affect your microbiome. That will improve your emotional status, fear, all this kind of stuff as well. So there's so many different things that you can do other than these probiotics and these types of things, very inexpensive ways.
Yes, and I just want to share a piece of information I found very useful for me, and that was I was wondering, when I have to take an antibiotic for some reason, how long does that affect my microbiome? And so I found some studies showing that they used a common antibiotic that we use on a regular basis. If you want to know specific names, you can talk to me individually. But because I don't want to say anything about any certain brand. But anyway, it took up to 45 days after a 10-day course of antibiotic, there was still not a completely normal microbiome present as there had been before. So my point is, if you may have to take a 10 or 15-day course of antibiotics, you're going to want to try to get your microbiome back healthy for up to 45 to 60 days.
Okay, so I'd like to do two questions that are repeating. I'm going to ask Dr. McCullough if you'll lead off, and then we're going to pivot to some spiritual dynamics relative to the stewardship of our body, relative to Caesar and God. But there's a couple that are repeating. Last night you shared the basic regimen. We will be posting those slides. But there are a lot of people asking what that early treatment is that you were talking about last night. Would you mind summarizing that briefly?
Right. So the early treatment is a combination of nutraceuticals first as a base, and then a sequence of drugs for the highest risk patients to give a monoclonal antibody infusion at a local ER or clinic, like President Trump received, and then drugs in combination. The drugs to reduce viral replication are hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, plus doxycycline or zithromycin, which are mildly helpful antibiotics. Many of you have actually had a viral infection and gotten a Z-Pack before, but a lot of you have, because there actually is some slight antiviral effect of azithromycin. And then after that, it's the use of steroids, inhaled steroids and oral steroids, and a medicine called colchicine. And then lastly, aspirin and blood thinners. And so the more serious the case is, the older the person who has more medical problems, we layer on more of these drugs. But we want drugs in these three categories to impair viral replication, inflammation, and then blood clotting. We do it in the hospital, and so the point is, why wait until being that sick? Just do it earlier. And the shortest course we can do on this, and it's been shown in younger people, 5 days. Average course for people your age in the audience, 10 days. A sick senior citizen in the nursing center, people in their 80s and 90s, 30 days. One of the points I want you to understand, it's a long illness. Like how long have you, from your start, how long have you, a year into it?
It's almost 2 weeks.
So she's 2 weeks and she's not back. And I'm older, and I can tell you it was about 35 days before I felt normal. And it's a longer illness. The older you are, and I try to coach people, say, listen, this is not a simple cold. You have to have patience on the recovery. Interestingly, I exercised on illness day 8 and treatment day 6 to, in a sense, kind of show America that I could do it. It was really hard. I was really short of breath because it was in my lungs, or I had involvement of my lungs. But some have innovated, one treatment center in Dallas, of actually exercising people with low oxygen saturations, mainly to just increase the pulmonary blood flow. Some of you know people get really sick. We actually have people sleep on their stomachs and elsewhere to try to get blood flow to different regions of the lungs. And so the only caveat is if someone has an acute fever, they should not exercise, because there's lots of studies suggesting a viral infection is not a good idea. But beyond the febrile phase, to build in some exercise and get outside. Get outside. The virus can fill up an entire room. If you could actually see the virus, it's an entire room. I was talking to this pastor whose son passed away. I said, where do you think he got it? He said, well, they went to a kid's birthday party at a Chuck E. Cheese's. And I said, well, the Chuck E. Cheese's is kind of a big place inside, right? And I said, you know where the danger part of Chuck E. Cheese's is? Go to the restroom. Public restrooms are small. There's virtually no airflow. And when someone has a big sneeze in a public restroom, they can leave, and that restroom is filled like a cloud of virus. And there's been studies showing if you fill up a small room like a public restroom with a cloud of virus, you can come back 3 hours later and sample it out of the air. Yeah, so that's where, so if you're worried about any type of public activity, worry about the restrooms. The restrooms are always where the most concentrated air is.
We can assume nobody will go into the restroom safe for the rest of today.
Okay. Would you mind explaining what those nutraceuticals were that you were talking about?
The idea with nutraceuticals are they may not cure somebody of a severe case, but there are data suggesting when we're deficient in these nutraceuticals or these vitamins, then all the data is clear. We have a rougher time when we get COVID. So the time to start these is not at the time of being sick, but if you're low. So for instance, zinc. How do we get low in zinc? A lot of us take diuretics for high blood pressure, for instance. Well, we get rid of zinc, so we tend to be low in zinc. Vitamin D, it's pretty easy. Why are we vitamin D deficient? Because we're all wearing 3 layers of clothes and we don't get enough sun exposure, okay? So vitamin D deficiency. African Americans are vitamin D deficient because they have dark skin and they actually don't have this conversion. We need sunlight to convert vitamin D2 to D3. So vitamin D. The other supplement is vitamin C. Okay, and then the third is interesting, and this probably has the best support for this one. It's called quercetin or quercetin. And so the doses are for zinc, 50 milligrams of elemental zinc, vitamin D, 5,000 international units, just suggested, vitamin C, 3,000 milligrams, and quercetin, 500 milligrams, once a day preventively, and then twice a day if sick. It's called a nutraceutical bundle. We had it in our very first protocol, and it's pretty well supported. I don't want you to think that it's going to cure. Some people have said, oh, treat it with vitamin D and you're going to save all the patients. No, they're going to need some serious medicines. But the idea here is it's clear those people who die with COVID, they almost always set up with a bad vitamin nutraceutical profile or bad micronutrient profile. They're probably actually set up with a bad microbiome.
Okay, Dr. Vine and Jonathan, you've gotten some questions relative to the spiritual dynamics of this. Take us on a journey with one or two of those.
Well, I'm very interested in the question of to whom does my body belong? And I think it's important that we ask the Word of God what the answer to that is. And the text that comes to my mind is 1 Corinthians 6, very famous. And Paul concludes that chapter, verses 19 and 20, by saying, "Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, which you have from God, and that you are not your own? For you were bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body." And so the question is, to whom does my body belong, and to whom do I owe allegiance with my physical body? And it's very clear to me in this passage a few points. One is that my body belongs to God, it is not my own. God created me, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. He knit me together in my mother's womb. The prophet Jeremiah, he consecrated, he called, he set apart people in the womb for life's callings and ministries. Secondly, we read in this passage that we were bought at Calvary by Jesus Christ, and that's, we don't believe that our spirit is separate to the body or the mind. We are an indivisible whole. Our complete being was bought by Jesus Christ at Calvary. Thirdly, this tells us that the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, dwells within my body and delights to dwell within my body. And as a Christian, I'm not to live a life where Jesus casts out the spirits and to live a life where the house is empty. That is one that is susceptible to satanic attack. Matthew chapter 12, I believe there. And so the Holy Spirit wants to dwell within my body because I've invited the Holy Spirit into my body. Fourthly, as a steward of all that God has given me, my body belongs to God, and I honor God by honoring my body. So if I give a toy to my child, and he looks at the toy and looks at me and trashes the toy, it's not that he's angry with the toy, it's that he's showing disrespect to his father. And I honor my Heavenly Father by taking care of the body that God has given to me. It's an expression of worship, how I look after myself, if I overstretch myself, if I understretch myself, how I live is an expression of worship, not just what I sing in church on Sabbath morning. And finally, when Jesus comes again, he will resurrect me with my body, but that which is corruptible will become incorruptible, and mortal will become immortal, and perishable will become imperishable, which is what we read later in this epistle, 1 Corinthians chapter 15. So when Jesus said to the Sadducees, you must render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, he asked them for a coin. And he said, whose image is this? And they said, Caesar. And he said, to render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's. But the question is, whose image do I bear? And we were created in the image of God. We're not created in the image of any president or Caesar or emperor or prince. And because I bear the image of God, I reflect God to this world, and I'm to honor the God who impressed his image upon me. And so I would say today that in the case of vaccinations, if I choose to be vaccinated or if I choose not to be vaccinated, it is a matter of conscience still that am I honoring God with this decision? Am I maintaining honorable and honest stewardship of this incredible body that he's blessed me with? Am I going to further his kingdom through this vaccination process? Not the state demands it, therefore I must do it, regardless of what the Word of God says. So I believe that my body belongs to God, and if I'm vaccinated or not, I want to do this as an act of worship to my Heavenly Father, not because the state demands it.
All right, so let's follow up on that. So when we see God, belief in the inspiration of the Bible, and absolute truth evaporating out of a society, we shouldn't be terribly surprised to find ourselves locked in these kind of situations that maybe 2 generations ago would never have made it to a cultural battle. And those principles you're enumerating, which are excellent principles, are really calling us to a complete integrity of principled Christian living, not cultural Christianity, where we go to church, but we watch the same things, we spend our money the same way. I mean, if we're going to, with integrity, like you talked about last night, Jonathan, in the Liberty and Health Alliance segment, if we're with integrity going to claim a conviction along this line, we better make sure that we're true blue believers. And at some point in time, some sacrifices are going to be made. People are going to lose things. And it may start with your job. But we probably shouldn't be living mortgage to the hilt and anticipating that there's a great future for us. We probably should consider living lives in such a way that we're not compromised when we do have to have positions that might involve some loss.
My wife is Russian, and I love reading Russian literature. And I like reading Solzhenitsyn in particular. Some of you have picked that up by now. And if you read his novels, you read these discussions among the prisoners over many chapters over the morality of the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union, the argument was, we're doing this for the greater good. Because there is no stewardship to God. I'm not responsible to God for my body. Therefore, we do it for the good of the Republic or the Soviet Union. And in those debates, this is kind of paraphrasing it now, somebody uses an analogy. He said, look, a vehicle cannot make progress down the road unless the wheels turn. And when the wheels turn, rubber gets rubbed off the wheels, but the vehicle goes forward. Therefore, it is not immoral for people to be crushed in concentration camps and executed, and the forced starvation of Ukraine and so forth. This is not immoral because it's leading to a greater good. So when you subvert the individual to the needs of the state, then the inevitable result is what we saw across the Soviet Union. And when the rights of the individual are trampled on, then there is no concern for the sanctity of human life or basic justice. And so you read these debates in the writings of Solzhenitsyn, and I think that when we hear today questions about the greater good, this is coming from an increasingly secular society. And the arguments for the common good in a secular society, we've seen for 70 tragic years where that leads us. And so when somebody asks me, well, what about this? Well, with the vaccination, and I'm not a doctor, but we're being asked by society to take a vaccine as an individual. We can't take it as a society. I take it as an individual, and I bear 100% of the risk of that vaccination. I believe that it is immoral to demand from an individual that they take on all the risk of the vaccination, when society has already decided that they will not compensate me for any realized risks. So Congress has said that the pharmaceutical companies are not responsible, the hospitals are not responsible, the physicians are not responsible, my employer is not responsible, but I'm somehow irresponsible if I will not take this vaccine. So do not... The idea of the common good, that I do it to help, let's say Jonathan's immunocompromised, me taking the vaccine as an act of responsibility to him assumes a mutuality in society that says I'm responsible to him and he's responsible to me, but our society is already predetermined, society is not responsible to me. So therefore, society cannot then therefore use the common good argument.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to pivot to Jonathan on that, and I see we have two responses as well, so we'll pick up on those. But there is a question that was sent in. If an employer mandates a COVID vaccine for his or her employee and the employee suffers serious consequences, who is legally or ethically responsible for covering those damages? Is there any recourse?
You know, right now it looks like no, there isn't. For a while there was a ruling that said that it was going to be treated as a workplace injury and to be workers' comp. And workers' comp isn't really the best way to get compensated anyway. It's kind of a deal they made with society that we'll give you partial compensation, but we won't have to prove negligence. So it makes it easy to get things. But it's not a really good way to go. So it's sad. You're 100% right that there's no compensation here really. And that's gone away. There's not even the workers' comp, is my understanding right now. The thing that I would like to point out, and we can see it if you look very discerning in our society today, is that there's a corollary to what you said about the greater good, and that is some people are more equal than other people.
Okay, I'm going to go to John and then to Joyce.
Well, I totally resonate with what Pastor Conrad said about choice and what the real moral issue going on, but I wanted to share something that I think might be helpful. When I decided that God was calling me to become a physician, I discovered that I needed to be fully vaccinated to be even admitted to medical school. And I didn't have a religious conviction against vaccines. I just hadn't had all the vaccines that were more modern. I was a child a few hundred years ago, and so they had come up with quite a few since I was in school. And I remember praying about that and asking the Lord, and I looked at the evidence that I had that He was calling me and had made provision for me to go to medical school. And so I decided, all right, I'm going to trust Him. He knew about these, even though I didn't. And so I took them. I was vaccinated for a number of things. I don't even remember them all, but many of them. And that I would have never been exposed to, probably. But one of the things that came to my thinking as I prayed and thought about this was that I wasn't taking those vaccines to keep me from getting sick. Yes, they would do that, presumably. But the reason I was willing to take them was the same reason that I was willing to go into a profession where I was going to be exposed to sick people day in and day out. I did not want to communicate from one patient to another. Like, before Lister, the physicians in the 1700s it was not uncommon to work with a cadaver and then go do rounds on patients. We know that's horrible sounding. And so the reason I think this is relevant is thinking about the greater good. In order to be safer as a physician treating disease, to me, it did make sense that I would do all I could to avoid being a carrier or a spreader. Of course, it doesn't mean that I wouldn't still spread disease, but at least I felt that it was morally justifiable, and I'm very comfortable with it. I was then, and I still am. And so how do I apply that now? Well, I remember in the early days of this pandemic, say March, April of last year, I was anticipating that I might very likely come in contact with someone with COVID-19. And at that time, we didn't know as much as we do now. But I remember thinking to myself and praying, I'm just being vulnerable here with you, not an expert, but talking to you as a person, a fellow person wondering about this. I actually had a prayer conversation with God for some time about wouldn't I be better off if I had gotten COVID and recovered? I mean, wouldn't I be safer? Wouldn't that make me a better instrument? I mean, you guys are sitting here telling us you feel, free and you're not a risk, and that's what I was thinking. And so I was counseling with one of my colleagues and about this, and he says, "Well, you're not talking about going and getting deliberately exposed, are you?" And I said, "No, I haven't come to that conclusion that would be reasonable. But I am convinced that if I do work with a patient who has it in God's leading in my ministry, I'm perfectly comfortable with that." And he says, "Well, this thing can be deadly." And I said, "Well, yes, I know that, but driving a car can be deadly too, flying on an airplane. I mean, so I don't know about you, but for me, I died when I was baptized. John Kelly, J.H. Kelly Jr., died when I was baptized. That's how I understand the scriptures. That's what I experienced. I remember I used to be I shouldn't confess this. I'm supposed to be a macho guy, but I used to really get nervous taking off on an airplane. I was like, I did not like takeoffs. But after I became a Christian, I actually could almost sleep through a takeoff. I mean, I'm dead. It's up to God whether I die on this airplane or not. And I totally, maybe it's childlike, but I just turned it over to God. I'm like, okay, here I am. And I actually, as I grew as a Christian, I started realizing, hey, I don't want to go to sleep because if we have a wreck, I want to try and help as many people as I can. So anyway, I'm just trying to share, I believe that if the reason we do something for the greater good is because of our conviction, it's perfectly correct. But if you try to force me to do something for the greater good, that's entirely not correct.
Yeah, that is very well said, and I appreciate explaining your personal journey. So if we weren't under such a compacted, pressurized system and there was more time, then probably people who have some hesitancy or concern could decide whether it was legitimated or illegitimated. Because everybody sitting around this table has dozens of vaccines that they've taken, all right? And I know to go to Africa, I've got my yellow card and stuff like that. Nobody here is opposed to vaccines, but the current issue is intensified by narratives that have never been in American culture before while we're living. Now, I was thinking relative to Japanese internment. It's before I was living, but we came up with rationale to set aside many Japanese citizens in this country. I don't think we look back at that with any sense of pride, and I think a culture has a hard time evaluating a way to measure its levels of fear. And when that happens, we have problems. Okay, Joyce?
Well, you know, what you were saying kind of brought up a few things. I was going to respond to what Pastor Conrad had said, but, you know, the reason I think that I was interested in this subject of liberty was because when I was starting to talk about autoimmune disease, one of the things that we found out and we put in our cookbook could be a trigger, an inflammatory trigger. You know that when people get autoimmune disease, not only do they need to have leaky gut, genetic predisposition, but they need an inflammatory trigger. And one of those inflammatory triggers can be a vaccine. And there's literature about this. I was going to be on a podcast with someone who's fairly well known, and we started talking about that. He said, I see you put in your book that vaccines could be an inflammatory trigger. I said, yes, we found that to be true with our clients as well as in the literature. And he said, I think it's been well established that they're scientifically found to be safe. And because of this discussion we had, I was canceled. You cannot have this discussion either there. And so the reason that I got interested in this subject was because early on I realized in society there are things you can't talk about. You'll be canceled. And what we're seeing right now is just kind of a culmination of it because it's happening worldwide and it's happening on such a large scale. And so that's why everyone's talking about it. So that I just wanted to share with you, this is nothing new what's happening, okay?
Yeah. So I think what we're getting at here is it's a personal decision. And that personal decision should be informed. I know when I was listening to Paul Merrick from the FLCCC, I thought he laid out a great metric. He said there's a risk-benefit analysis. Everybody has to decide what that is for themselves. And that's really what created this weekend, is that somebody is in some situations, they're taking that away from us.
That's right.
And that is not acceptable in a free culture that used to base its foundations on, the identity of the creator and the creator of nature, which is the way our documents from the founding of this country recognize. So,
and then can I just say another thing with what you were saying about Marxism, in that we do things for the greater good. As a very naive girl, I thought that sounded beautiful. We do things for the greater good. We do things to help people. But a lot of times that doing things for the greater good comes with a loss of personal liberty, as well as personal responsibility. And it seems like that's what we're wanting people to do right now.
Right, and that's why you have civic dialogue. Because in the marketplace, the free marketplace of ideas, those things can be discussed. And again, the tamping down of that in this current scenario has created issues. And so obviously, whatever we're doing, Christianity or any philosophy we subscribe to, it's got strengths and weaknesses. For Christians, we do believe in greater good, just not the way a secular society would describe it. Yeah. So we long to be positive, but not to have a fearless and faithless mentality run the show and create losses of liberty that now are happening in a vacuum where before the vacuum was filled with a sense of liberty God ordained, made in the creation of God. So it's the absence of the ability to talk that is the main problem right now, because any one of us around this table might land differently on what we do want to take and we don't want to take. But when we can't talk about it,
That's right.
then we have a societal problem.
And then the third thing, I'm sorry, I'm taking up so much time, but the third thing that I just want to share was this. It's, wherever there's a problem, this is an opportunity. As Pastor Conrad was saying, that each of our lives, we are made in the image of God, but there are millions of people in the world who they think, you Christians, you're going to get religious exemption. How about us? We have nothing. But this is an opportunity to share with the world that they are made in the image of God too. And because of that, their lives have sanctity. This is the opportunity for us to look at other people, to know where they are, try to build bridges, I think, and for us to see how can we minister to our brothers and sisters who don't know that there's a God who loves them.
Amen.
I was just going to say, first of all, I want to thank you both and the church for allowing something that we as physicians went to medical school and support, and that is informed consent. Informed consent means being provided information to make an individual decision. But if information is not available, then there's no way informed consent can take place. So I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, praise the Lord. It's a lot of people working together.
A comment to show you how far things have really come in a disturbing way. Do you know no two doctors agree on anything? And no two lawyers agree on anything. There's always different ways. And throughout, I'm starting my 4th decade in medicine. We spend an inordinate amount of time going to meetings, discussing panels of doctors. I've been on 1 million panels of doctors where we discuss something and we have different viewpoints. This is the first time in my career where there's no discussion. There's no fair exchange of viewpoints. When you turn on TV or go on the internet, you will not see a panel of doctors freely discussing the risks and benefits of anything with respect to COVID. Nothing. It is distinctly unusual to not have a fair interchange of ideas. And somehow this set down upon us, and we're at the point now where there is no discussion. And it's so interesting. I've been involved in a group that, in a sense, I kind of assembled over time. It's got a couple thousand people in it. But one of our most flamboyant members is Steve Kirsch. And Steve is he's the guy who invented the optical mouse. And so, as you can imagine, he's a multimillionaire. And so Steve Kirsch has said, if anybody would just come and gather around and have a discussion about this, I'll pay you $1 million. I'll pay you $1 million to have a discussion. He said, listen, if anybody actually wants to discuss what the NIH and the CDC and FDA does, I'll pay you $2 million. He goes, I'll pay you $1 million just to have an opposing view so we can discuss. No takers. No takers. That, I am telling you, that is the level that we are. There will be no discussion on this. No matter how much money is put on the table, there is no discussion of this.
I totally agree, and this totally amazes me as a trained epidemiologist, as a physician, as an amateur scientist. I can't believe it. But let me give you an illustration that struck me so greatly. I was reading the actual form that I believe, well, I won't name which one, but one of the vaccine sites, I went and got the form that you use when you administer the vaccine, okay? You give this information to the recipient and so on. And in the first 2 paragraphs, I read 2 statements that I had seen someone canceled on the media, either Twitter or YouTube, for saying. But it's right there on the form. And the statement on the form says, there is no FDA-approved vaccine for COVID-19. And yet, I know people, not me, but I know people who have been canceled for making that statement. And Have we gone crazy?
I just want to say something. As a lawyer, I'm really trained as a trial attorney. That's my style of law. And one of my jobs is to cross-examine or present scientific witnesses. And, you know, they can say just about anything we'll pay them to. But that being the case, we still try to find truth at court. And right now, you guys are being presented with a lot of different viewpoints. Lots of different viewpoints. And you're not scientists. You really have to do it the same way us lawyers have to do it in court, and we're just doing it in front of a jury because the jury's going to make the decision, and you guys are like a jury. You're just a cross-section of society. You need to be looking at things like, is there suppression of speech? Because that's a big indicator that someone's got something to hide. You know, it says you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. The truth doesn't need any protection. So that's one thing. Another thing, look at the contradictions. I'm always pointing out contradictions in things that people talk about. And I can't believe the amount of contradictions that have been made in all of this debate. I was listening to someone that was talking about the Soviet Union. You may be able to say more about this, but I think it was particularly bad during the Stalin era where they'd get up and the state would say, this is the truth. You know, they'd be talking about something, and then the next few days they'd come back and they'd say, oh, this is the truth. And it's something else that's completely contradictory to what was before. And the reason why they were doing that, everyone's like, yes, 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 that's the truth. It was really a loyalty test to see just how loyal you would be to the regime. And so we're living in this here in America, and it drives me nuts that people don't have a historical understanding. We're kind of poorly educated in history. We're poorly educated in what's going on around the world. I wanted to make a comment, too, about this whole greater good thing. I've got a nephew, and I was talking to him, and I realized, wow, this guy, he doesn't really think the way I do. He's kind of woke, and he's thinking about greater good kind of things that we're talking about here. And I tell him, I say, you probably think your uncle's a real jerk. He says, no, we like you. I'm like, okay, good. But I got to thinking about the greater good. If you want to know how to approach the idea of the greater good, we used to be able to do this. Our society used to have heroes, and we could look and see what they did. Working at the VA, I was exposed to the Congressional Medal of Honor Memorial, and you can go there and you can see one story after another of someone who sacrificed for the greater good. And believe me, it's not Marxism. And at my house, what I've done is I've made a collection of all these old missionary stories, all the returned missionaries. I got hundreds of these books, literally. I love reading them. These are all people that went out for the greater good, and they were serving God for the greater good. And I can tell you, none of them are Marxists. And a lot of them ran into Marxism while they were going around the world spreading the gospel. And you can see that Marxism is counter to Christianity. So we need to share these stories and these principles to our people. We've got to present the Protestant culture to people. If we don't do that, these arguments about the greater Marxism in a vacuum sounds great. But we don't live in a vacuum. We don't live in that kind of world. And we need to get the truth out there. We've got to share this culture with our youth, with each other. And anyway, we got to do it.
So I'm not a scientist, but my understanding of the scientific process is that you develop a hypothesis. You then gather the data, you compare the hypothesis against the data to see whether it matches up or not. And so you have today's hypothesis, which matches today's data, but when tomorrow's data comes in, you're obliged to examine yesterday's hypothesis against today's data. And when the vaccines came out earlier this year, I'm going to assume that everybody was acting in good faith. Let's just take that as a basic assumption here. And that there was data to support the hypothesis of the efficacy and the safety of the vaccines. But now, 8 months later, we have an awful lot of data. And the question is, are we going to allow today's data to inform yesterday's hypothesis? Because if yesterday's hypothesis is going to be enforced despite today's data, then yesterday's hypothesis now becomes dogma. And when dogma is enforced by coercion, you are in tyranny. And we're at that place where, I think in Western society, where tyranny is at the door because we cannot evaluate yesterday's hypothesis against today's data.
Very good insight there. We have 17 minutes left and we have dozens of questions. So I'm going to bring two to the table here. One person is asking about telemedicine. How does it work? One of our physicians, explain this to us a little bit. Telemedicine. What is it? How does it work?
Well, telemedicine, it's something that we are actually, Liberty and Health Alliance is working on avidly. Telemedicine is, well, the previous administration made it so most of the states in the United States, as long as you had a license, unrestricted license in one state, you are able to practice in another state via telemedicine. Most of those have expired. I personally looked up every single state through the Federation of State Medical Boards just a couple days ago, and I know which ones are still eligible and which ones are not. Telemedicine is a wonderful opportunity, particularly for people in rural areas, or in our case, that have a difficult time getting early treatment. That has been a problem, as Dr. McCullough pointed out. So it's a wonderful opportunity where you get to meet with a physician via technology. They get to take your history, they get to learn some of your past medical history, and then they're able to provide a diagnosis, and in our case, as we're discussing right now, early treatment. And it is a really quick way of getting not just to the medication, but something that Liberty and Health Alliance is going to be doing, and that is instructing people in their homes how they can take some of the principles that we've been hearing about, hydrotherapy, different nutritional aspects, and actually applying it right then and there in your home.
So are you saying then that telemedicine is primarily an in-state phenomenon now?
No, right now there are 9 states that are still allowing interstate licensure transfer. So what we're working on is collaborating with lots of different physicians from the other states that don't allow for the cross licensure. So for example, let's say there was a physician in Maine that wanted to join on board, then we would be able to refer patients in Maine to that particular physician, et cetera, et cetera.
So is something like the Liberty and Health Alliance a clearinghouse for where telemedicine can be found, or where do you find access to it?
So we will have that finalized by Tuesday of this week. There has been a lot of details going into that, including malpractice, which has turned into quite a new challenge, but we figured that one out as well. So yes, write into us at libertyandhealth.org, put in the subject line. If you're a physician, for example, you're interested, or provider interested in participating, just put in the subject line telemedicine. If you're a patient and you're finding yourself in a difficult situation having access to early treatment, please put in the subject line telemedicine, and we will provide that information to you. We'll also have a spot on our website where people can go and learn more information as well.
Okay.
Yes, I just want to put it in real simple terms for those who may not be that aware. So it's typically by email, can be by phone and text, and by something like Zoom or Skype is the way that we typically do telemedicine.
Okay, so we have both there complementing each other, the mechanics and how it works in general. All right, question here relative to the blood supply, blood transfusion. I think you started to touch on that, Dr. McCullough, last night. Can you comment on that for anyone that might have a surgery coming up or a concern?
Right, so we became aware, I think in June, that the blood supply is almost certainly contaminated with people who have been vaccinated, particularly within the first 2 weeks of vaccination, where the donated blood could have the circulating spike protein go into the bag. And we had a patient who got sick after a transfusion at my hospital. There was a bunch of calls. And we notified the Association of American Blood Banking, which actually regulates blood supply, and the American Red Cross. The blood supply currently is tested for about 9 things. It's not tested for everything, but it's tested for babesiosis and tested for malaria, it's tested for hepatitis C, AIDS, other illnesses. But right now, there's not a method by which they could actually measure the spike protein in blood or even measure messenger RNA lipid particles or adenoviral DNA particles. So the response back from those agencies are, we're aware of this, but nothing's going to be done. One of the suggestions was to just exclude somebody who was vaccinated for a month or so, some type of reasonable time frame. But the thought was there were so many people vaccinated that would reduce the blood supply. So what came out of all this is this acceptance, in a sense, by default, that the blood supply is going to be contaminated, but to make matters worse, vaccinated people, the antibody response is so thin, it cannot be usable for convalescent plasma to treat COVID-19. Only the truly naturally immune can donate convalescent plasma. So because of this kind of widespread contamination of the blood supply, there was a complete abrogation of the convalescent plasma program in the United States. So in a sense, the vaccines contaminated the blood supply and now took away a therapeutic option for inpatients.
Sounds pretty serious. All right, let's talk here about the Nuremberg Code. Is there someone here that would like to explain what it is and how it's impactful to our dialogue?
So the Nuremberg Code's pretty interesting. It came out of the Nuremberg trials in Germany after World War II. They were prosecuting the Nazis for war crimes, and specifically the experimentation that was done in the camps. It was actually a document that was made for a trial court, and there's a lot of misconceptions about the Nuremberg Code, and this is why I kind of went for the mic a little bit. What a trial court doesn't have the force of law. Furthermore, these are trial courts that they were U.S. trial courts, in a sense, but they weren't on our territory, so they don't have a way of making law in this country. However, the Nuremberg Code was a fabulous statement of medical ethics, and that went on to make the foundation of medical ethics in the United States and for many different international accords. And if you ask anybody who's in medical research, they know all about it. And this really is the standard of ethics. Certain aspects of the Nuremberg Code have been adopted into American law. But if you're going to sue someone, you can't sue them for a violation of the Nuremberg Code. I just want to make that clear, because some things that are going around on the internet would lead you to believe that you could sue someone on that basis or put someone in jail or something like that. But the Nuremberg Code is a marvelous thing, and it's a nice, succinct way for anyone to get up to speed on some basics of medical ethics, especially in the research context.
Okay, John.
Add a comment. When I was at Loma Linda, I had the privilege of working on some research in lifestyle medicine, and so I had to get what they call certified, to do human research. And your comment there is so apropos. I could not get this vaccine program past the IRB that I had to work with to do research in the Marshall Islands, for example. It's, again, it's like we've gone crazy.
Let me just address this. So the randomized trials that Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J did, the registrational trials, they actually had what's called a special protocol assessment with the FDA. So the companies agreed with the FDA on the design and conduct of the trials, in which patients would be in the trials and which patients wouldn't. These protocols then went out to all the centers that were doing research. My center was one of them, and those protocols had to be approved by an investigational review board, a human ethics board. Okay, so the registrational trials where patients could have gotten the vaccine or placebo, they were on the up and up. They actually had safety safeguards. They had a day safety monitoring board. So if the vaccines would have had some type of terrible, immediate, violent effect on individuals that could have been seen within 2 months, That could have been snuffed out with a independent data safety monitoring board, and there was a human ethics board. And for that reason, in the randomized trials, strictly pregnant women are excluded, women of childbearing potential who couldn't guarantee contraception, COVID recovered patients, suspected COVID recovered patients, patients with prior antibodies were all excluded because the FDA and the pharmaceutical companies and the ethics boards believed that there was no opportunity for benefit and there was a great opportunity for harm for those individuals. Now, as you can see this rolling out, once it got into the public program, it's still research, but now there's no event committees, there's no data safety monitoring board, there's no institution review board, there's no oversight of this giant human experiment right now, and it's unbridled. Pregnant women, get the vaccine. Women of childbearing potential, get the vaccine. That should make everybody immediately feel uncomfortable. And I think anyone who has any understanding of how science is done in the world of research should be enormously uncomfortable. You're right. It could not get past an institution review board. We have an Office of Human Research Protections in the United States, OHRP. I've written to them. And they have 6 cornerstones of medical ethics. First is the Nuremberg Code, which says that no one in research, in any case, can receive any pressure, coercion, or the threat of reprisal for something injected into their body. They cannot. And so in a research study and in the registrational trials, if we would have offered people $500 to take the vaccine, that would have been out of bounds.
Unethical.
Unethical. Can't do it. That's called coercion. For a low-income person, that's called coercion. We couldn't do a research study and say, here, you can be in a raffle for $1 million. We couldn't do that. We couldn't say that you got a college scholarship to be in research. That's called coercion. That's putting someone under duress. A low-income worker could say, listen, I could feed my family from this. I'm going to do this even though it could harm my body. That was the Nuremberg Code, was to protect this idea of pressure, coercion, and threat of reprisal. The second cornerstone is actually the Declaration of Helsinki, which said, listen, there needs to be informed consent. And if this has to be 26 pages long, it's going to be 26 pages long because you have to know what you're getting into. And I showed you the informed consent from my hospital. I showed it to you yesterday. It's pretty brief. The consent form for the vaccine says, we don't know if this is going to work, and we don't know if it's safe. And you better tell us if you're pregnant, but it implies you shouldn't be pregnant. And so you have to understand what's going on right now. People are, we're all going to lose our jobs in 2 months. We're being asked to do something that is absolutely out of bounds in terms of medical ethics.
All right, I'm going to acknowledge Dr. Vine, and I'm also going to give you the last assignment here, so save a minute or two for what I want you to talk about.
You know, I'm a regular Joe. I trust my physician. I want to trust my physician. I have my annual medical on Tuesday, which I refer to as the annual ritual of humiliation. I get a letter shortly thereafter explaining about my triglycerides and all kinds of other stuff. My eyes just glaze over. I think, I've got emails to write. I'll deal with it next year. But I trust my physician to act in my interests. And we keep drawing parallels to the Soviet Union, but during the Soviet Union, physicians and nurses, they were the agents of the state. They were not acting in your interest. People who disagreed with the narrative in the Soviet Union, if they were not committed to concentration camps or labor camps, were put in psychiatric units and fed psychotropic drugs. Those mind-altering drugs were given to them. And many of the most famous refuseniks, such as Andrei Sakharov, experienced that at the hands of physicians who are now acting as agents of an oppressive state rather than in the interests of their patients. So I'm participating this weekend for many reasons, but one of which is I want to maintain that relationship of trust with my physician. And I want my physician to have the courage to say, Conrad, this is what the public media says, but this is what I think is truly in your best interests. And I think that relationship is so important, because if the narrative can split husband from wife, physician from patient, if we are atomized as a society, we are much more open to totalitarian rule.
So I think what we're reaping a little bit, we've sown the wind for the last 2 generations And this absence of understanding of the cost of a free society has left us handicapped in a moment of duress for civic dialogue and debate. All right, Dr. Vine, I'm going to ask you to take this segment to a close with this question. How and when should we share our convictions regarding the COVID pandemic and vaccinations with others?
I think that's a great question, and I understand this came from a young man in this community, actually, when this email came in. I believe that we are called to live not with fear. We are not called to live in fear as Christians. We are to live with peace in our hearts because our eternal future is secure. And in the book of Luke, we read that before Jesus comes again, one of the dominant emotions on earth will be fear. Men's hearts will be failing them for fear for what is coming upon the world. And fear and anger are dominant emotions today. And you cannot dismiss or respond to an emotion with logic. You respond to an emotion with a more powerful emotion, and that is the love of God. So I want to live my life today. I've traveled all over the world. I've been in Brazil. We've sent our staff to South Africa. We've been to Bangkok, and our missionaries go all over the world during this pandemic. We're living our lives with confidence that God is in control, and that our role is to demonstrate his love to a world filled with fear. And when we live our lives filled with the love of God, trusting that my eternal future is secure, people take note of that. And they can ask you, what gives you this confidence, this courage to live? Then I can share my faith. And so my life does not depend, my happiness does not depend on whether I have the vaccine or not, whether I'm recovered or not, if I have immunity to it or not. My salvation is sure. I have the assurance of eternal life, 1 John chapter 5, the first 2 verses. And therefore I'm not going to live in fear of this. I choose not to live in fear. And I ask God to fill my life with his love every day so that the love that shines out of me can inspire other people to live beyond fear as well. And if they ask me a question about the vaccine, I will explain what I think about the vaccine, but I'm not going to thrust it into their face, because that may come across as aggressive or it may turn them off. But I want them to see the fruit of a life of confidence with God, and that involves everything in my life, not just what I think about the vaccine.
Okay, thank you very much. Christians are respectful people, so let's carry that along. This weekend and this forum was never intended to be a debate. If you want to listen to a debate, I listened to one the other day, which I'll recommend. It was on a Newsweek podcast between Liz Wheeler and a fellow from the Brookings Institute. It was very interesting, and it's something that you might enjoy. I'm not affirming it in any sense, it's that I thought that it was well done, and from the standpoint of two people discussing it, well articulated. But this forum has not been designed to be that, and we appreciate our panelists, the time we've spent here, and we'll ask God's blessing. We'll take a 15-minute break, and then we will be back with Matt Staber from the Liberty Council. So I'm going to ask I'm going to ask Jonathan if you'd close this out. I think Dr. John started us. So
Let's bow our heads. Dear Lord, I thank you so much for the freedoms that you've given us here. Lord, I thank you that we live in this time when we still have freedom. I pray that each one of us will take advantage of that, and that we will share, especially our belief in you and the love of you to others. Lord, I just pray that you will go with us now and stay with us as we continue in this program. In Jesus' name, amen.